Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with JcrOffroad. Today in the garage, I'm going to walk you through how to install our Crusader sliders here on our JT Gladiator. So we'll start things off with a little bit of assembly work here on the slider itself. We're going to begin by installing this lower skid plate to the bottom side of the slider. That's pretty straightforward and simple. It's only going to fit on there one way, so you can kind of go ahead and just set the slider boat itself down over top of the skid and then begin lining up the actual mounting holes out here on this flange. Now you'll fasten those two together using the black 5/16 button head hardware along with the serrated flange locking nuts. And it's going to be a good idea to just get all of this started loose before you begin tightening anything up. So you're going to have 4 of those here along this back flange, along with 3 more out along this front edge. And once you get all of those started, you can grab a 3/16 hex and possibly a 1/2 inch wrench to hold the nut side if necessary and get those tightened up. Then we'll move on to installing the provided rock lights into each end of the slider. Now with each of these, you want to make sure to get this blue protective coating removed from the light lens before it gets installed. And then we're going to take these and install them to the inside of this slider face to keep them nice and discreet and low profile. Now each of these lights is going to come with their own provided hardware. That's what you're going to use to get them installed. You'll start by taking the small plastic insert and installing that into our bolt hole here on the end of the slider, which I flipped around so you can get a little bit better view of this light installation location here. Then take the provided button head. You can pass that through the hole, and then reaching up from the back side, begin lining up and installing that light. Then you'll want to find one of the provided washers along with nylock nuts from that light bolt pack and go ahead and thread that onto the back side of this button head. Now the only thing you want to pay attention to when you're tightening these is that you're making sure to get them kind of tightened evenly so that this light sits nice and square to the face. So then you can just go down and repeat that installation process over on the other side, and then it's just up to you to get those wired in either as conventional rock lights, or you can choose to wire them into your dome light circuit so that they illuminate as you open your doors. Now once the lights are in place, we can move on to installing the clip nuts that'll hold in the steps and tread plates that'll be installed later on. So you're going to have 2 different sizes. You'll need to identify the larger and smaller ones. The smaller are going to be M6, the larger are 5/16. The 3 smaller ones are going to go in the 3 holes here at each step location, and then you're going to have 2 for each step location that'll go down here. Those will be the 5/16. Those should simply slide over the holes like so and kind of lock into place. Now you need to find the 4 brackets labeled with a number 5 on this back flange. 2 of these we're going to install here to the slider. The other 2 we're going to install loosely up on the vehicle. Basically the way these are going to go is they'll mount to the corresponding holes here in the top face of the slider. There's going to be pre-installed nuts in the bottom side of the bracket, so you can simply slide that under this top mounting flange, get those lined up, and then by hand just thread in 2 of the 5/16 black button head bolts at each location. Now with these, you want to thread them basically all the way down by hand. Leave them just loose enough that you have that little bit of wiggle and compliance in the bracket, and that'll help you out when we're getting it installed up there on the vehicle. And then we'll just have to finish these off because they get pretty tight to the rocker with a traditional hand Allen wrench. So now I've got the 2 brackets here on the top of the slider. These other 2 are going to mount up on the vehicle, like I said. But before we do that, I do want to point out that I kind of forgot to mention earlier on in the video how to identify which slider is the driver versus passenger side. So obviously the overall length of the sliders is going to be the same, so it can make it easy to potentially mix those up. But you can kind of look at this next to the side of the vehicle, pay attention to the step locations. Those should line up pretty closely with the doors. And then you can look at, from the step to the end of the slider, the length of material that you have right here. So the shorter end is going to be at the rear versus this much longer end is going to be at the front of the vehicle. Now moving up toward the vehicle side of things, you're also going to need to find these 4 innermost mounting brackets. Those are going to bolt to the body side on the inside of this pinch weld, and they're going to be labeled with numbers here on the top, 1 through 4, and that's going to be from front to rear of the vehicle. Now I'm actually kind of starting in reverse order here with bracket number 4 toward the rear of the vehicle. Basically that's going to line up with these 2 holes here corresponding with these 2 mounting holes in the pinch seam. Each bracket like this is going to have 2 holes here in the pinch seam as well. And then you're going to use the provided M8 flange head metric bolt through the slot here at the inside of the bracket into a factory threaded hole underneath to begin mounting this in place. Now, if needed, if you're not able to thread that bolt in by hand, that'll be just a 13mm socket to get that started and going in. And then you want to leave that just a little bit loose for some added compliance at this time, much like these other brackets. So now you have 2 of these number 5 brackets on the slider boat itself. The other 2 are going to go at the front and this rear location. So the 2 pre-installed nuts go out toward the slider. These other 2 slotted holes are going to go in and line up again with this pinch seam, however this time mounting on the outside of it and basically sandwiching that pinch seam between the 2 brackets. For that you'll find the 5/16 hex head bolts along with washers on each of these. You can install that number 5 bracket here to the outside of the pinch seam, and then from the inside out get that bolt started through both brackets and the pinch seam. Then here on the outside you'll use another one of those 5/16 serrated flange nuts and get that started in place. And then we'll just use the same set of hardware up here at this forward slot. So then moving forward with bracket number 3, I'll get that lined up here on the slider, install another flanged M8 hex head bolt, and this one will simply be left loose like so, since the number 5 bracket for this location is on the slider. And then we'll repeat these processes moving forward to get the number 2 and number 1 bracket installed, making sure that that final number 5 goes on with bracket number 1. Now with all the brackets in place up here on the vehicle, we can take the slider and begin sliding it into place. And having these kind of located and loosely mounted out here, we'll be able to kind of gently set the slider on those. It'll have something to kind of start supporting it while we begin installing more of the 5/16 button heads here through the top. So obviously I'm working with a vehicle hoist here, and I have the luxury of this trans jack to hold this thing up while I kind of get it lined up and into place. Obviously that's easy, that's kind of best case scenario, but you could do this very similarly on the ground in your driveway with a floor jack, or just the help of an extra set of hands from a friend makes a big difference here during this part of the install. So basically I'm going to go up and get this top flange kind of set over top of our outside brackets like we had mentioned before. Now I'm just going to start by lining up this last hole here at the back edge of the slider and starting one of these 5/16 button heads by hand, and then I'll go all the way up to the front and get that one started as well before coming back and installing these last 2 innermost bolts. And then when you're installing this hardware, much like on the inner brackets here, you'll basically want to thread this all the way in by hand so that you don't have a lot of tightening to do with that traditional Allen key later on. Next, working at bracket location 3, and then this installation will apply to bracket 2 as well. You'll need 4 of the 5/16 hex head bolts with washers, along with 4 of these serrated flange nuts. Again, much like before, you'll install these from the inside out with the nuts here on the inside of the slider. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see them, but the other 2 are going to tuck kind of up top here and bolt from that slider bracket out to the inside flange up top. Now the only real difference with bracket location 4 as well as bracket 1 up front is that because of the way we installed those number 5 brackets and everything earlier on, you'll just be left with 2 of those bolts, washers, and nuts to install down here on the bottom flange in those locations. Now you can install both of your step and tread plates. So the step, slide down in one end, should kind of slide through that opening, and then you can slide it back to center it and line it up on the bolt holes. Then take the tread plate, pay attention to the JCR logo cutout so that that reads properly. And then you can center that up and start 2 of the black 5/16 button heads here. And then in the top side up here, you'll install 3 of the black M6 button head bolts. And then once you get all of this started, you can repeat this process for the forward step. Now with both of those steps and tread plates in place, we can begin to tighten things up. So it'll be your 3/16 hex down here in your bottom hardware and a 4mm hex up here for those M6 button heads. Then this is when you'll need that 3/16 Allen key to work your way along the top and tighten those 8 5/16 button heads through here. Then once you have those tight, we'll need to get underneath here and tighten up all that hex head hardware. Now we went with the serrated flange nuts in these locations so that theoretically they'll bite into the material on the back side, and you'll just need a 1/2" socket here to tighten up this 5/16 hex hardware. However, you can reach over this backside if necessary with a 1/2" wrench to hold that nut. Then once you go through and tighten all of this 5/16 hardware holding the brackets to the slider, you can come back with a 13mm socket and tighten those metric bolts into the body. Then once all your hardware is tight, you can repeat that process over on the other side to complete your install. Now if you guys have any questions about this installation or any other JCR product, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can send us an email at info@jcroffroad.com or give us a call at 269-353-1184.